So the purpose of this video is to give a 5-minute history of computers, but also to show how difficult it is for people who don't know how it works to talk about it, and also some personal history of how I got involved. So computers were invented in 1951, and initially were very big machines. They took a whole gigantic room, and they required very specialized personnel to be programmed, to be maintained, and so on. Now, it's interesting already there to see how, for example, philosophers and intellectuals in general saw the computer at the beginning, because they didn't understand how it worked. They imagined a future where these machines would just be getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And you know what happened? These machines got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller because of the progress of electronics, of the invention of the transistor, of the integrated circuit, and then Moore's law, and so on. And anyway, at the beginning, so this is the age of the mainframe computers. I saw them when I was in high school, and then when I started working. And you couldn't even get close to these machines. There were specialized technicians who were taking your punch cards and feed the punch cards inside the computer, and then you would come back after a couple of hours and get a printout with the result of your program. This was basically big calculators. So what the philosophers, the intellectuals missed, they didn't know about programming languages. If you just focus on the machine, on this big machine with all the lights and the wires, you miss the point. The real point were the programming languages, which already existed in the 50s. And what the programming language does, it enables you not only to do calculations, but in theory to perform, to create any kind of application. Now, for a long time, these mainframe computers were used for mathematical applications, payroll computation, accounting, some information retrieval, some scientific computation, but mostly for business, for big corporations. An inflection point was towards the end of the 60s, when a company in particular, Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC, but also others, they made machines that were smaller, and they popularized the idea of the mini computer. Why the mini computer was important? Because it went to the factory. The mainframe just didn't make sense to have a mainframe in a factory. But the mini computer, like the DEC PDP, that was a big success story, could sit on the floor of a factory next to machines, creating numeric control equipment. And also at the end of the 60s, I think in 1969, a very important operating system was created at Bell Laboratories by people like Ken Thompson, the Unix operating system. And the Unix operating system, in my opinion, was a very influential moment in the history of computer. In particular, in 1977, when a student named Bill Joy released it from UC Berkeley. At that point, a new kind of mini computer was born. That at the time was called Workstation, and the most famous maker of workstations was Sun. And so besides the factory, this was also useful for other kind of engineering applications. And these workstations typically were running Unix. And then in 1971 the microprocessor was invented, so almost immediately people started thinking about making very small computers that could sit on a desk. And so by the end of the 70s you had several kind of personal computers, most famous the Apple, and that brought the computer not so much in the home at the time, but certainly in the office. So the huge mainframe that had been basically limited to the big corporations was now in the factories, in studios and in offices. And then in the 80s it started percolating into the homes of ordinary people. Now the other major inflection point is of course the internet. Now that's another thing that if you don't understand how it works, you miss something. So by the way, personal history, I arrived in the United States in 1983, which I believe is the year when the ARPANET adopted TCP/IP and so became the internet. Right now I don't remember who named it internet and in which year. When I was working on it, we called it ARPANET. So in 1983 we still would call it ARPANET. Now the internet had been created actually way before. The first proto-internet in the late 60s. So what happened in the very important development, I don't want to get into technical detail, but it was the TCP/IP invented by Vint Cerf that really made the difference. Anyway, in the 1980s it was already spreading, but it's interesting how philosophers and the intellectuals in general totally missed it. It's hard to find a philosopher who talks about networks or computers. Philosophers were obsessed with the television at the time. If you spoke to them about a network, they would have probably mentioned television. McLuhan is famous for coining the term global village, but he wasn't talking about the internet. They didn't see that networks of computers would eventually become a universal network of computers. And more importantly, they didn't see what we were doing on a daily basis. We were already exchanging emails on a daily basis, and we were already posting news and reading news on bulletin boards. So there was the prehistory of personal communication and social media. So again, if you don't know how it works, you don't really see what is going to come out of it. So then the story continues. Between 1989 and 1992, several important things happened that changed the internet into what it is today. in my opinion, it's important that in 1989, UC Berkeley basically distributed Unix to not the masses, but to a much broader audience. BSD Unix became really the backbone of the internet. In 1991, of course, Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web, which makes it easier to link on the internet. And I believe in 1992, Bill Gore famously said, "I invented the internet." He didn't, but he was vice president in the Bill Clinton government, and that government did something important. They decided to open the internet to business applications. Previously, it was limited to academia and research and military and so on. But after 1992, it could be used for commercial purposes, and that's the age of the dot-coms. That's when companies like eBay and Amazon are born. And that the next eBay, Amazon, and then you have search engines, Google, and then you have social media, Facebook and Twitter. The next inflection point, the smartphone. The smartphone predates the iPhone, but people tend to think that the Apple iPhone is the one that started the age of the smartphone. Of course, that was born out of the convergence of the Moore's law that was making chips smaller and smaller and smaller, and of wireless technology. 1G, 2G, people don't even remember this, 3G, and now we are 4G, 5G. So, and each G meant that you could do more on your phone, text, images, video. And so that's mobile computing. So that's when we go, at that point we have gone from the mainframe computer that was a giant computer in a room to the small devices, small mobile devices that can run applications. Now there's a new inflection point, that's artificial intelligence. So I never liked the term. I've been into AI. So personal story. In 1983, I came to the United States to work on the internet. And a funny anecdote. My first job in the United States was to make two computers communicate, exchange emails. I thought it was an incredibly stupid idea, so I take absolutely no credit for understanding where the world would go. In 1985, I founded the Artificial Intelligence Center of a major European corporation that had a lab in Cupertino, in Silicon Valley. And so that was 1985, that was almost 40 years ago. Well, AI was already old. The name was coined in 1955. You can even find conferences before 55. The very important one was in 56. Anyway, 55 when it was when the term was coined, and so it took a long time, and the reason is very simple. The number one reason is that computers were not powerful enough. At some point, the power of computers accelerated so rapidly, largely thanks to video games. GPUs were invented for video games and turned out to be very important to power today's artificial intelligence. And So today's artificial intelligence, which is very different from the one I was working on in the 80s, is another inflection point because because machines can generate, they can generate text, generate images. Old AI was even struggling to just recognize a text. It was even difficult to recognize numbers, recognize an image, what's inside an image. And thanks to more powerful machines and also some new algorithms, it became this was done, recognizing text, images, even videos. But more importantly, they realized that you could do it backwards, and the machine would generate text and images. And so ChatGPT and DAL-E, and very soon also systems that generate videos. I'm not sure which ones are available publicly right now in March 2023, but they're coming, they've been demonstrated. So these things are the new are really the new AI, and also very popular because pretty much everybody can use them. I think ChatGPT is the app that has had the most rapid success in the history of computers. So so that's my brief history of computers. Final anecdote. I was thinking as I was talking, and I know this would sound like some kind of vanity, but it's not vanity. It's just talk about destiny. I mean, I was born in 1955, and I just said the term AI was coined in 1955. I ended up spending almost 40 years of my life working on AI. And 1955 is also when rock and roll was born, and I ended up spending my life also listening and writing about rock music. And by the way, 1955 is also when Bill Gates and Steve Jobs were born, much more important people than me. But the point is that their work had a huge influence on my life. So anyway, talk about destiny. Okay, so that's my brief history of computers. Serious point. There were at least 3 major inflection points that intellectuals, I think, had trouble understanding the underlying technology. And the first one was at the very beginning, computers. Intellectuals thought computers would just get bigger and bigger and bigger because all they saw was that those big machines, lots of lights and lots of wires. Then the internet, that in my opinion was ignored by intellectuals who were so focused on television. And now I think artificial intelligence, I think it's not easy for people without the right background to understand what these deep learning systems are, how they work inside. And so it's probably also difficult for them, to my prediction about the future, the silly prediction that so many intellectual philosophers are making, is just, oh my god, these machines are getting more and more intelligent, and some are worried about what happens when we have to coexist with super intelligent machines. I don't think that's the right way to look at it.